It's Reed Young, aka Shooter here. I'm going to do a 6-max hand review for you guys. We're playing 200 no limit. Before we hop into the action, I have a gameplay video that I will put in an annotation that you guys should be able to see on the top right of your screen right now. And if you guys enjoy that video and want to see part 3 of the 3-part series, go ahead and click the like button on either of those two guys, and once we get up to 40 likes, I'll bring out part 3. So that said, let's hop into the action on this end. I think it's a very cool spot that a student of mine showed me today, who will remain unnamed. So his read on the big blind, before we get too far into it, is that he folds to an above average amount of small blind raises. So he was saying something about 75% of the time, and you know, Jack 9 to some people might be a borderline raise pre-flop, but when someone's folding that often, we should be raising a lot of hands here because we can pretty much auto profit by, you know, raising any two. So as long as we don't get ourselves into too much trouble post flop, we're looking good already pre. So the flop comes King Jack 2 rainbow, and we decided to check the flop. And I think this is okay because given our read, his range is going to be fairly tight, and if he does call, we expect to be either, you know, racing or behind his range. And now that's not enough reason to check the flop, but what could happen if we check the flop is the big blind might try to put us on something like pocket sevens that are trying to get to showdown and start bluffing us. And when that happens, we do want to make sure we have some stronger hands in our range that can check call and aren't worried about too many turns. So with the Jack 9, we're really only worried about the Queen and the Ace coming on the turn. Nothing else is really that worrisome for us. And even still, like hands that he has, like, you know, Ace 9, he might just think he can get to showdown, and that he has enough equity against our checking range that trying to get to showdown or trying to hit a pair on a later street is going to be a better play than bluffing would be. So against his bluffing range, we should be doing pretty well, even if a scare card comes. Against his semi-bluffing range, though, that's mostly what we're worried about. So if he's betting something like Queen 10, a Queen or an Ace are obviously terrible cards for us, or something like 10-9, he could effectively barrel us off of our hand if he has a balanced range that's based on equity. So checking the flop, I think it's a good part of your game plan because you don't want to be continuation betting all the time, and since you want to give up some of the time, you want to check and not give up some of the time, so that way you don't get exploited every single time that you check. I think that a lot of people in middle stakes no limit just bet when checked to, and exploitively so they are correct to do it, just because people don't have a very well balanced checking range yet. So that's something to keep an eye out on for your game. And you know, since we spent like 3 minutes talking about the flop here, let's keep it going. So we do call the flop as planned. The turn is pretty weird just because it's an unlikely one for us that is probably going to affect how the big line plays against us quite a bit. So we decided to check again, which I think is good. I think we should be checking here with our hands like pocket sevens, you know, maybe Ace 10 if we decided to check call it on the flop, and you know, the occasional king that we did in continuation bet. Likely our weaker kings, you know, the kings that we think we wouldn't get 3 streets of value from by betting on most innocuous board runouts. So I think the turn you want to check call to protect all of those weak kings. You could check raise some of the time, but I would probably choose your stronger jacks that you check with on the flop to do that, just because we want to maximize the chances that we're getting called down by a worse hand. And so if we had something like Queen Jack, I think you're in check raising territory, whereas like Jack 9 and below, I mean, I could see check raising Jack 9, but Jack 9 and below, you might not get paid off often enough. So without discounting our you know, our value range for check raising too much, you definitely want to make sure that you work in some bluffs here too, because I think if you check call something like Ace 10 or pocket sevens even. Maybe you want to just try to end the hand right here. So that could be a valuable part of your game to have into, and it's important to check out all your options. So you guys can see that this is a pretty funky hand that we've gotten ourselves into, but when you really think about every single part of the game plan, there's going to be a lot of stuff you need to consider, and I think this really highlights it. So let's check out what happens. We check, he bets under half pot, which is kind of like, wait, what are you doing here, man? Because I guess he thinks he folds out a hand like pocket sevens every single time if he is bluffing. But if you were going for value, I would expect him to bet a bit larger. This is also my student's read as well. So both pretty skeptical going into the river. But I think if he wants us to get to the river with a hand like king 4, and he's perceived as very rarely bluffing this turn just because of how hard the jack hits our range as well, then I think he doesn't necessarily have to bet a large size to balance his bluffs with his value bets, because he's not trying to get 3 streets of value with many of his hands anymore. So in other words, he's not really going to be betting all of his jack X hands when check 2 with the idea of betting 3 streets. So for him to bet the turn, I think his most likely value hand is a solid king, something like king 10, or a bluff. So the river is a 10, and here's where my student was like, okay, what do you think about this? He leads for about 1/3 pot, and I think it's a good play against the right type of player, but it's going to hurt our range quite a bit, because if we're only leading strong hands here, or really leading anything here, it's going to be pretty easy for the big blind to play against, because if you think about it, what air have we check called twice with on the flop and the turn, and then got into this river? So if we are leading out here, it appears like our range is, a decent king or better. So if our opponent has a king, he can easily call or fold with the appropriate ratio, whatever he estimates to be our leading frequency with a king. And if he thinks that we just have so many jacks in our range that our lead is just extremely jack heavy, he can just fold anything that's pretty much below jack 9 here, because he thinks maybe we don't raise jack 8 pre-flop. So against this lead, I think a good player would play incredibly well. But on the other hand, against a really bad player, someone could get owned pretty hard just thinking like, oh, he bet 14, that means he never has a hand because 14 is a small bet. And I think, that's a great thought process against some weaker players. And you really need to find the right type of player too, because you have to have someone who's not amazing at hand reading, but someone who will also indiscriminately attack a weaker bet size like this, or a weaker appearing bet size. And by weaker, I don't mean our range is weak, because I think it's incredibly strong, like I said. I mean just a small size. So he sees small size and he thinks, oh, there's no way he can have it. Also, another reason I don't really like the lead is, like I said, he can play pretty well against us. And if he does come over the top for a huge bet, then I think he can just do it with, any straight or better and get a lot of value from us. And we're putting ourselves into a situation where we have no clue how often he's bluffing, and our range, looks exactly like what it is. So a good player, again, is going to take advantage of that and play extremely well against our bet. And if our plan is to bet call with a jack and to blocker bet a king here, then we're going to be in a rough spot when we're facing a raise, because we're never going to have a good hand other than jack 10. So unless, we start checking great hands on this flop, which might actually lose us value in the long run, as opposed to just betting 3 streets and trying to get a call down from a marginal hand and balancing with our semi-bluffs. So when we lead the river, it really messes up our range, and I think it makes our opponent be able to play very well against us. So I don't like the river lead, but you guys can see our opponent does raise to 85, which is a pretty large raise, about pot size. And we call it, which I think is standard if we are going to continue. Our opponent was bluffing, but without any reads, I think that you're going to get yourself into a lot of trouble playing hands this way. That said, and the whole theme of the video is that you should be considering all your options here. It's a funky line, and if he thinks we're going to be bet folding a lot of our kings and that's most of our range here, then say maybe he thinks that we check raise the turn since he bet so small, we check raise it with all of our jacks. So we never have a jack. So he can raise every time and win. If that's his thought process and we can exploit that by bet calling a smaller bet like this and inducing a raise from all of his bluffs, then we're probably in pretty good shape if we're doing that. However, if he can hand read and understands probably the optimal way to play the hand of just check calling 3 times to protect our weaker hands, then I don't think this play is going to help us for this hand that much. And additionally, it's going to hurt our game plan a lot because it's going to mean when we check the river, it's going to be extremely easy for him to keep betting as a bluff, and we'll always have a bluff catcher, as opposed to checking a hand like this on the river, where we could check call and some of the time we'll see a hand like king queen or something like king 6 suited that's trying to push us off of a chop on the river. So yeah, that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it ran a bit long, but I think we went into some pretty cool details about this hand, and there's a lot of possibilities to consider about it. So if you like it, share it with a poker buddy and help our channel grow. Take care, guys.